And we're on.
Episode 8.
Oh, wow.
We passed the 7 mark.
Yeah, we cracked it. We made it. We can just shut up shop here and
Yeah, we tell people we did it. Sweet, bro. Yeah. Well, we were catching up before we started to hit record, and then we were like, nah, we might talk about something interesting, so we'll save it.
Yeah. I think well, we were talking about, I think earlier in the piece we were going through our business model and kind of what type of activity. The question was, how can we ensure this is a sustainable thing, like
Financially.
yeah, financially sustainable, and what are the services that we could provide, or who could we partner with, and that's kind of what's forming in the next couple of months, is figuring out how we can put gas in the tank.
So, and it's been really interesting journey from when we started to here, and we've spent a lot of time fleshing out, like, what's the problem, what types of solution are we offering, how do we think you can actually address the problem, and what is the problem. And then I think the network state concept was already out there, but now it's grown. The community and other people that are sort of doing parallel civilization type of things, I feel like that's developing so fast in the past year, and now it definitely helps me think about, do we contribute to that? How would we see ourselves in that vein? That's given a lot of additional angles, I think, to think about maybe what services we'd offer, and how can we be a financially sustainable entity so we can keep on the mission. And I think probably a lot of the people in those spaces are really good examples to look at.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that we saw as a potential service for us was, there's only 2 of us right now, and we need to deliver all of the functions of a team of 10. And so that's why we were leaning into AI tools, and that's, like we had in our last episode, probably talking a lot about the role of AI and how can we support other small business concepts that, these kind of entities that are starting up with a little bit of people. How can we support them to scale? So that might be a custodial role that we might help deliver. But yeah, there's trying to figure that out. That's the tricky part. But exciting too, to see what everyone else is up to and how they're doing it.
Yeah. So would we be functioning like the group that's basically been a financial custodian for us, for other?
We've currently have a financial custodian that's supporting us because we don't have an entity. So they're kind of providing the umbrella service. I feel like we wouldn't be an umbrella service, but maybe if we had someone else, if me and you had someone else with us that could go through all these processes that we've been through ourselves and help us to help support them through their business efficiencies, or just all the kind of, like, what are the tools out there that you can use. But yeah, they won't have, if it was a fresh entity like us, I'm just thinking, if it was us, when we didn't have an entity, you would need some kind of financial umbrella.
Yeah,
we could deliver
but
that, but I don't want to clip the ticket like that.
No, and I don't know how many not-for-profit startups have funding before they've incorporated. Like, I don't know how common this scenario is.
Yeah, I think it's really uncommon, because we've challenged the entities, the corporate structures, the legal structures that you can incorporate as, because we wanted it to align with our principles for whanake from the start. So yeah, that's why we haven't got an entity. If we wanted to just go straight into it, we'd be like, boom, limited liability company, boom, and then me and you directors, and that's probably what everyone else will be. So yeah, no, you've got a point. Would we support a structure that's like a business, say, like, that's kind of the a for profit, for the profit for the benefit of shareholders type business. I don't know.
It's a good thing to grapple with because we're trying to be a part of this Game B Solarpunk Animist, or we're trying to be a lot like allied, I guess, in general with this sort of
Mm,
parallel civilization movement, right? And we want to offer our specific um, style of that, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And offer that as another option within this ecosystem of sort of parallel civilization startups. Um, and it's a really important question to grapple with of how do we bring resources into this entity so that it can hold a space and advance the mission that Funky Foundry has. Like, how do you bring resources in without being fully game A, without
yeah,
being fully materialist and reductionist? You know, like, how can we resource this thing without destroying it to get resource?
yeah, yeah. And how can we take on that responsibility without necessarily requiring others to? Because I wouldn't want, if it was just a small duo that just needed some structure and some guidance, but they were a LLC, they were a company. We shouldn't have to require them to be A, B, or C. But if their mission and their values were aligned, and they knew
Yeah.
exactly what they were doing, if they were creating some products that contributed to solar punk futures or something, and we could support them in some way, I think that might be more important to support businesses with similar principles, but instead of pulling up business entities that don't reflect ours. I know you got a big bag of yarns for us to talk about. Um,
Well, yeah. It's hard for it to not become the AI update podcast because it's so much is happening. So I'm
mm,
trying to avoid it always being about AI. And I have been thinking there's two things that came to mind since we talked last that I thought might be interesting to bring to the podcast. One was I heard someone, I mean, again, talking about the 4-day work week, which isn't new, but all of these trends and forces are making people grapple more and more outside of like futurists, like more into the mainstream dialogue. Well, if more and more people's labor is replaced and not needed, this question of how do we have a society that can still function? And I think that's hopefully the role of groups and entities like Funky Foundry and other futurists, is that our vision for society isn't based around people's purpose being to consume products and
mm,
to churn the economic cycle. Um, and so I think, it's not like we'd have all the answers, but I think our vision is easier to adapt to a world where people don't have to work 40, 50 hours a week.
mm.
That's not the core aspect of the human experience. And it's interesting how big of a deal it is for the current paradigm if that's not needed. I feel like that's almost a harder thing, is the social impact of that more than the financial. You would think that if efficiency goes up, the amount of goods and services available to that economy should be more than before. So it's just a distribution problem, right? Like, you
Mm.
would think that if efficiency is going up in the system, it's not like we've got less goods and services. So it's just a matter of how you distribute them,
And
but keep innovation and keep progress going.
and I think that's where um, concepts like artificial scarcity come in, because if you have AI providing all these efficiencies for whatever, you should only have a distribution problem, like you said. There should be plentiful everything because it's
Mm.
because you have the ability to scale. But when as soon as you make plenty everything, um, it's going to be detrimental to whoever's in control. It's going to their bottom line essentially. So yeah, I think AI always comes down to um, who controls the distribution of the benefits from AI, and how do you bring someone with the or some entity, or how do you bring game B into that space of decision making, of distribution, of, or like, yes, yeah,
Well, that's the previously technological developments that reduced the need for labor and made all of the economic processes more efficient. The distribution was still decided by people, but now we're getting to this type where people are talking about, well, maybe AI is an answer to how we distribute, right? Because the last 100 years or more has been this sort of battle between capitalism and communism as the two major, I guess, concepts for how you distribute stuff. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right?
mm,
And then now people are saying, okay, well, those both have their challenges. And then ultimately, you always have people. And as much as people are scared of AI, they're also scared of people being corruptible. So you get this idea, well, what if we can, like a DAO, just give this AI a really clear value set and rule set, and then we don't have to worry about it being biased or whatever. So I feel like whether that's a good idea or not, it's interesting that now the discussion will be, well, what value set do we tell them, right?
yeah,
What's something that could be universally agreed upon? Because if you start giving it current political views, if you give it, well, give it a religious, give it our religion, like those aren't things that are easy for everyone to buy in for, as opposed to, I think our vision is fairly universally accessible
mm,
if you share that value.
yeah.
So you know, it, I'm not saying it would be a good idea that we give all the power to an AI, but if that discussion starts coming up, I don't think people have a lot. They mostly would just give it ethics, but I don't know if this side of the sort of the base stack that we have is would be in the discussion.
It'd be cool if you seeded the AI with these principles, this way of guiding it through complex decisions and falling back on these first principles, and just saying, map out the next, X amount of years and these societies. I wonder if you could set two AI on different trajectories and see just what kind of worlds that they come up with. Like in the like self-driving car problem, the auto, um, like if a self-driving car comes into a problem where there's like, there's a car, like oncoming car on, so
Yeah,
do I swerve or do, but on the pedestrian side there's a person, and on the other
yeah,
side there's like a tree. So if I crash into the tree, I might kill the driver. Do I hit like, that's a
beautiful.
principled decision. I'm wondering,
Yeah,
and that's technologies coming out now. I wonder what they've based those
yeah,
decisions on. Like, if is it a financial decision? Is it a, do you
yeah,
maintain the asset that's being driven at all costs, or
yeah.
um,
Do you prioritize your driver because and
yeah. Do you
because ultimately you have to give it instructions to make a choice, and that involves saying, do we try and save the driver or this pedestrian?
yeah, and so that's kind of those decisions. I wonder how they are being made and what principles they're being made on,
Yeah,
because those will be the same decisions, the same base set decisions for how should we allocate resources, or how should we do X, Y, Z in the future. I like, and I just don't even know what the right, like, what an answer is. And I don't think there is an answer, but there is a way of basing your decision on certain principles.
yeah. The only thing that saves it from being less painful as a human is you just wouldn't really have the time to make a conscious choice, right?
Yeah,
But if you had to have the time yourself, like, I don't know what you, there wouldn't be a choice which would be make you feel good, right? But
yeah.
luckily, in the moment, you just like barely conscious probably of the decision you make.
Damn, that's such an interesting way to think and look at it. Because if you stop time in that moment and you were
Yeah,
driving,
it's like, all right,
which one would you go for?
yeah,
Like, if I was,
make the
yeah,
choice.
you'd make the choice and far, and then knowing that you'd consciously have to live with that decision and the legal
Yeah,
repercussions and all those things. That's
true.
essentially an AI, because an AI has like
Mm-hmm.
the computational time
True.
to make those decisions faster than us.
Yeah,
So, just
but it's interesting that the emergence of AI and all the philosophical and practical questions of what do we tell it, like what do we program, what value sets, and it's not that it's new. Like I know, what was it, like the Turing test and these discussions, and I think, oh man, was it the author that wrote the Foundation? Was it Asimov? I think wrote stuff about actual AI and how you would set up, what rule sets could you give it that would give safety to it not becoming a Terminator. Like, so
Mm.
what I'm saying is these discussions have been had for a while, but they weren't practically needed yet. But it as opposed to now, where it feels like probably what they're putting into the rule sets now could actually be referenced by some artificial general intelligence that could emerge. Like it
Mm.
feels actually probably pretty critical that there's good information stock for anything that should it develop a general intelligence that it could actually look at and learn, or guidance, or anything that's going to maximize the chance that it has a symbiotic relationship with human intelligence on Earth.
Mm.
And I think like the types of discussions and thinking that we've been doing for how do you go back to first principle for society, and what do you, if you think of social order as a technology, what's at the base, stack of that. I think that's just a similar type of discussion to AI. What do you tell it first? What does it prioritize, foundationally, and then build upon? I would love to see the dual simulation that you mentioned. Like,
It's
give it,
almost funny because if you were like an animist perspective where everything's living, and you had a human, and you had another person in a car coming at you, and then you had a tree, you'd be like, well, those are all living
yeah,
living entities, eh?
yeah,
And then you'd be like, well, on what scale of like what is your scale of maybe it's your
yeah,
relational, how it might be subjective based on the driver. Like maybe an AI will be like, okay, this is a person here who's maybe they're indigenous to a space, and that tree is very special to them. But then
yeah,
how do you like so
yeah. Well, this
so
is,
therefore run over the person? Like, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like how do you?
True. It has, if it has cultural knowledge, and it's like this is actually a sacred tree that has 200-year history of being a sacred place of worship, or whatever, medicine gathering, and it's actually highly significant. And then it has information because everyone's plugged into the social credit score, and it's like this person's, they're pretty average. They're actually not that highly regarded. So
Man,
you like, if you start adding in all these value assessments,
it's so
that's the joke person.
it's like a slippery slope, eh? Like
Hell yeah.
because heck, how do you? I feel like the answer would kind of
You have to quantify it. That's what's
it would
so
have
crazy.
it would have to, yeah, you would have to quantify.
For the AI right now, for how AI operates, you would have to quantify value, or I would assume, for it to make that decision on, right?
And yeah, and part of me,
You'd have to weight the decision tree through the neural network, but ultimately somewhere you're giving weight,
yeah,
value weights, right?
yeah, and regardless of, the weights might be associated with the person's outlook on life or like their upbringing, you'll
Yeah.
the AI still has to take that and quantify it and then process it and come out with an answer and then act accordingly.
It's
I almost feel like the AI would be like, in the simulation, I wouldn't put myself in this. I would avoid this, but then you wouldn't, because there will be times where principled decisions have to be made. Like almost every decision is based on principles.
yeah, it's like uncomfortable, but I think it is something you do have to answer. I think just as a person, you need to have a philosophy that can inform you on how you make these tough decisions. But almost even more relevant is if you're programming something that for now operates in a really digital binary way, you have to give it a reference for how to assign value to then make a choice. And you were sort of joking, bro, but you actually reminded me of our talk about the Funaki Foundry future civilization, which is spacefaring, and its aspiration is to increase the connectivity and the amount and the quality of connections. And then I was thinking, because we were saying, well, you have to actually be able to quantify and measure it to then make the judgment. But if you had really good information, you could start to quantify the quantity and the quality of connectivity of that tree versus the person.
Yeah.
And if the person had a rich connectivity, and in the animist view, we're not talking just with other humans, but across the whole spectrum of intelligence and existence, and the tree, and it actually had the ability to quantify that, it had incredible awareness and information, right? That could be a metric that it can actually use and say, well, destroying this thing or killing this thing or removing it, and judge it based on the damage to the connectivity, and be like, well, if we remove this tree, it actually has X connectivity damage,
Yeah.
and the person X. That's not a. I don't. That doesn't feel terrible to me.
Yeah.
If it has to make a decision, and it's saying that doesn't. That feels like the best thing I've heard so far. If you have to wait a decision on what thing to
Yeah.
destroy or kill, right?
I like two things pop in my mind. I think on like one of the Captain America movies, they create this like AI software that judges a person based on whether they're likely to be a criminal in their lifetime, and then it like kills them in advance of that. So I'm like,
Yeah,
damn, how do you when you're talking about judging someone's or anything, um,
yeah.
like you're in a slippery slope to being the villain of a movie. And then
Well,
the
but
other thing I was
yeah,
thinking of is like, but like sunburn, and when you get sunburn, like your cells sacrifice themselves because when they burn, they kind of die, and then they peel off or whatever. But because if they didn't, there would be you get cancer and your whole body would die. So at a
mm,
macro level,
yeah,
if the AI looked at a situation like that in this microscopic level, and said, okay, whatever's going to be detrimental to the overall relational connectivity of my whole being, I will choose this instead of this. Like I will, the cells that got sunburn, they're going to die, and the rest of the
mm,
cells we're going to live for the betterment of everything. And so, the last thing was I was um, been watching the Our Planet Earth series with Morgan Freeman, and he's just talking about like
oh yeah,
just like evolution is crazy, man. Just things just live and die and come and go, but
yeah,
it's all competitive. Like so,
yeah,
like that's almost counter to a relational evolution where things grow based on connectivity rather than competing with each other.
yeah,
But yeah, so I don't even know. Like, there's my way of saying, heck, I have so many thoughts and no answers.
yeah. Well, yeah. That's really interesting that you bring up the how the development of complexity has happened in our biosphere,
Mm,
and how it has happened has been pretty ruthless and hyper competitive. And I have wondered, and I'm sure many other people have, like, could you have an ecosystem which adds complexity and novelty and anti entropy, not through competition? Could you have that same progression of anti entropy, novelty, and complexity being built by a biological system, or maybe not, but biological,
yeah,
right? But in a hyper collaborative, is that an engine that could also produce,
I think,
right?
yeah, I think so. I was just thinking back to it. Like, there's been or like this is the sixth mass extinction now, and there's all been all these mass extinctions.
Hmm.
Um, but before that, the Earth was like in a crazy transient state, and then it's kind of simmered out into these steady states where
Yeah.
a certain arrangement of organisms and creatures and geographies all worked and just was in balance, and then something tipped it over, or sort
Yeah.
of
Comet hits
comet
the
or
planet. Yeah.
volcanic activity or
Yeah.
bloody carbon dioxide. Um,
Yeah.
Something else put everything else out of whack, but it did achieve this steady state. It's like, how do you maintain the steady state? Because I think
And
it doesn't mean that we always have to compete then to continue evolving. You can reach these steady states, but there's external influences that disrupt it.
yeah. I think I'm sure there is a way where you could have a complexity anti-entropy engine like biology on Earth that doesn't have to be through a competitive selection.
Mm,
Like it would be, surely it's possible. And there's probably, if I look at the internet, there's probably, 50 PhD papers or sci-fi authors. But anyways, it's a cool concept.
mm,
And that I think aligns more with the value set that we're proposing for society. And I guess that's what's unique about human actors, human beings, and agents is that we can make choices. We can try to make choices beyond biology, right? And
mm,
then even if the biological story that got us here was driven through competition, I don't think there's a reason to say we can't have an aspiration of a future where we have continued novelty and anti-entropy and all the beauty of life and biology, but be stewards of trying to shift it towards the refinement mechanism and the selection mechanism being selecting in a way that's less ruthless, right? That
mm.
would be interesting. And again, there's another thing for AI to simulate, right?
Like I was just did a cheeky Google just seeing around like
Yeah.
competitive evolution versus cooperative evolution, and yeah, that'd be cool. A simulation to run Whanake based principled competitive. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
a Whanake based animistic cooperative evolution. Like, what would that society look like?
Yeah. This is all from how does a AI car make a decision
Yeah,
on
yeah, man.
what to hit?
I'm thinking like going back to the sunburn example. A competitive situation would be like those ones don't want to get killed off. They'll be like, if you were to make a
Mm.
decision, nobody wants to die.
Yeah.
You want to, so everyone wants to survive. So then you're
Yeah.
in competition. But a cooperative setup would be, well, everyone is understanding that so and so, has to pass, or you have to be the cells that take the hit and die because
Mm.
otherwise everything's gonna die. And that's probably getting to that point. But oh man, fighting biological nature, not even just human nature, to accept to be
Yeah.
like, you know what, it is my time. Like, you know what, I am
Yeah.
detrimental to to the relational connectivity of our ecosystem.
You know what's crazy though? Imagine, I mean, in this scenario, it's a car hitting you, right? So, but if it was a scenario where there was time and the person could make a voluntary choice to be the cell that sacrifices, it would be interesting if making the choice for sacrifice actually blossomed your connectivity somehow. Like if you were a person that didn't have high connectivity, but then that opportunity actually connected you with so much because that sacrifice actually enabled so much to flourish. And then that's like a point for that life story where it goes from not really having value or connectivity that much to having tremendous value in the system.
Yeah, maybe if you're ever in a self-driving car, there's like a self-destruct button
Yeah, that it
that,
tells it
that,
to just hit the
that you
concrete
go like,
floor.
well, like, if this is gonna happen, the car's like,
Yeah,
do I kill them 1, 2, 3, or no? Like I'm committed to
yeah,
it. Boop, and then your car just shoots in the air and blows up. Like you saw, your cars blowing up
yeah.
everywhere. But that's an option as well. Like, how come? Yeah,
But
there's
we already have examples of that within different human societies. Like I remember when Fukushima disaster happened in Japan,
now.
they just had all these elderly people that volunteered to be the ones that were going in to check and try and control the runaway reactors. And I remember some of them being interviewed and they were like, yeah, well, I mean, I'm older, so of course it's my job to go in and it's like it's less detrimental for me to get this. So it was just like for the people speaking to it, they were just like, it's a no-brainer. Like it wasn't even like, oh, it's a sacrifice. They weren't acting like they were heroes. They were acting like, yeah, of course, it's basic sense. Of course, I would go in.
Mm,
And they just had tons of volunteers. And it's like our society, we would just let that thing go supernova.
yep.
Everyone would be like, I'm not going in. And we'd ask, the standard, elderly person here, and they're like, I got a trip to Europe coming up. I'm not going into that thing. Like, I got my retirement. I worked hard. Like, like that feels more like we would struggle to get people to volunteer to go into the reactor.
Yeah, and that's where self-sacrifice and the cooperative, that's a cooperative evolution trait, I suppose, of a society,
Mm,
when it's beyond you as an organism as one thing, where you recognize that you're connected to a bigger thing. I suppose when you recognize your relational connectivity to the world, then you can play the self-sacrifice card.
yeah.
Whether that's and there's probably a spectrum of things, like
Yeah.
even for us, like for our business of whanake, we're a part of a network of other people who are doing these kinds of things. And
Yeah.
so would we go into competition with certain with these people, or would we network and partner and say, hey, that person's probably better off to get this, because we recognize we're connected to the same principles, and then step back. Like, that's a level of I don't know if the word self-sacrifice, because that sounds like I'm gonna kill myself only like
Yeah.
a bloody
Yeah.
samurai or something, but um
Yeah.
but
But if we take it off of like a life or death, there could be sacrifices which don't involve you ending your life, right? I'll just take less of that, or, in this instance, it doesn't have to be a permanent sacrifice, right?
yeah.
It's still, well, yeah, you made me think of so many things. One, I think you're articulating something that's really interesting, which is the base of your social stack, which informs your worldview, is going to radically open or close, I think, how comfortable people feel sacrificing
Yes.
something for themselves for the greater whole. And where I'm at philosophically very much is in between, is not in the binary. Like, we get an extreme of all of the individual is often sacrificed for the whole, and then, or all of the whole is sacrificed for the individual. I think
Mm.
both those extremes are not healthy. And then also you made me think of, obviously, a materialist versus animist. How could you even fault a materialist for being like, why would I do that for them? Like, there's no greater meaning, there's no afterlife, there's no
Mm.
anything, right? It's just here. So it's like, who cares about that? Like, I don't even know how you could philosophically or ethically fault that person if they genuinely were materialist. I don't
Mm.
even know how you can, like, we can say there's a law, but for philosophically, how can you say it's wrong? What is even, what is there even to assign that to if it is irrelevant? But for an animist, then it's a whole different story. And my understanding of Japan and like the sort of the pre-Buddhist worldview, the Shinto worldview, my understanding of it is that it felt very animist when I heard about it, right? Like, mountains have a life force and awareness, and rivers, and it felt very animist to me, right? And I remember some people hearing that and just from a Western point of view being very confused,
Mm.
like thinking it was really alien, right?
And I think when you see the world, or when you have that base stack on animism where you're connected with everything, you then recontextualize your scale in relation to
Mm,
everything else. One of my mates, he we were talking about mahingakai, around the traditional food gathering as a cultural practice, and he said when you go out into like the sea, if you're diving, when you go out into the sea and into the taiao, you become aware of your insignificance, like compared to everything. Ka rongo koe I tō iti. You feel the vastness of the ocean and how small you are in comparison to that, but how connected you are. And
mm,
I feel like if you have the opposite perspective of a materialist, you are, material only exists within your consciousness that you see. So without you, there's nothing.
mm.
Um, so that was yeah, around the base stack of animism, you can kind of put yourself in the right perspective with relation to everything else.
It's funny. That's the same sort of lesson you learn as a surfer as well.
Mm.
That you're so powerless compared to the ocean, and that in almost every circumstance of going under or fighting against rips or currents or a particular individual wave, that there's no fighting it. and then you get to a place of acceptance and surrender. When you go under on a big wave, the absolutely best thing you can do is be completely relaxed and calm. Like that's makes the experience much closer to pleasant. Whereas if you're fighting in any way, you lose your breath so quick, you panic, and it's terrifying, right? But if you can find a way to surrender really to that force, which is so vastly more powerful than you, that you can have a much more pleasant experience
Mm.
and a higher chance of not dying.
Mm.
I'm like always trying to find a middle ground of like things that we need to figure out for
Yeah.
our mission and advocacy for Funky Foundry, and what's interesting and relevant now in a permaculture or syntropic agriculture type way. The things that can serve multiple functions across a wide domain of things are so valuable and useful.
Mm.
And
Yeah, like when you talk about contributing to the whole, I think of and small villages. I think of on a marae when there's a kaupapa on, when there's a whatever the event is, all the jobs get split up, and you know who's doing what, and there's only a little bit of people, and everyone's kind of trying to all chip in and all contribute because the big vision is so small. It's in the same place. You know what you're working towards and working together towards. But there's some people who dodge jobs and that's small. But in the small context, it's it is a behavior, but it's not as detrimental, I suppose. And then when you scale that up to like society, it's tricky to all work collaboratively together because you're not clear what the thing is that we're working towards. So you feel, oh, we're just doing stuff now. And then if you scale up the person who dodges their contribution, who doesn't make a contribution, at that scale, it looks like huge multinational corporations is extracting profit and not contributing any whatever tax or anything back into the whole. It's
yeah,
fully extractive.
yeah,
So there's some I think there's some merit in having a shared vision at that smaller scale. It's easier to see and understand,
mm,
and the the scale at which people contribute or don't contribute is kind of you can work and in that small scale, but up at the big part when you lose a collective vision, when bad actors have such an influence, um, there's like that's kind of where you're getting into exploitation, 5 day, 6 day, double shift type work week. There, so yeah, I haven't landed on anything, but it's interesting that you brought up those examples because like having 3 days of work and 3 days of rest plus 1 day of rest, that sounds like
mm,
more balance.
yeah. Well,
But yeah.
I think we need to identify some aspirations of that are desirable to get to, and then the brilliant creativity of humans can help solve that. But I don't think people even allow the space to believe that anything aspirational is a reality, especially like I think a lot of young people, a lot of people that feel displaced or disconnected, which is probably most people like under 50, right?
Mm,
And I'm not, I don't want to exclude, I'm not attacking people over 50, but I think the alienation and the displacement and the disconnect has grown over time. So there'll
mm,
be plenty of people of all ages that feel that deeply, depending on your life experience. But um, I think even we need things that you actually like. Yeah, hell yeah, that would be so much better. And I have some motivation now to contribute to getting there.
mm,
But right now, and I'm sure we've talked about this, so I won't go on about it. But right now, it's mostly just avoid negatives is all at a high level. All we really have on the horizon, right?
yep.
Avoid climate catastrophe, avoid nuclear war, avoid poverty, avoid whatever, right? It's like, don't do that because this super bad thing will happen. It's again, that's not going to generate a level of societal shift and change that we would need to radically transform things. But if all of a sudden you have a cluster of things which is exciting and people can think of, if I was in there, I think I would I would enjoy life so much more. I'd be happier. I'd be able to do things I want. It wouldn't be personally and culturally destructive. If they think that this set of circumstances would actually deliver that, and they can, and that's something that they can conceptualize of and hold. I mean, this is a whole pitch of Funny, right? Like, that could really, we believe, drive a shift in society.
Mm.
And that's why I think these little accumulating a group of things, which is exciting to people. Individually, like a 3-day work week is cool. That's not going to be enough to drive
Has
it,
to
but I
be.
think maybe
It has to be.
if you have
Yeah,
a
right.
concept,
I think
yeah,
you shared an example a while back. I don't know if we talked about it yet, but around the moon race, when
yeah,
everyone looked up in the sky at night, you saw the moon, and so you were a part of something. Reminded every night, we're going to go there. I'm going to get there collectively. We're all contributing together, but it was clear. It was like very
mm,
clear for everyone in the whole world.
yeah,
And yeah, if we could have something that's like that, that's clear in everyone's mind, that's every day reminding you of something better, of advancement. Um, I don't want to get into all the details. There's probably like a whole lot of war contracts that came out of military things, but having some kind of
yeah,
shared activation
yeah,
where everyone can see clearly within themselves or and understand it exists within other people collectively.
yeah,
At that scale, that would be massive. But yeah, if it could be a good thing versus a bad thing, or versus
yeah,
avoid negatives, can it be
yeah,
like reach for the moon
yeah,
instead of don't lose to the Russians, kind of, or the Chinese?
yeah.
Um, yeah, man.
And if you think of if your worldview conceptualizes things, um, if a person's worldview conceptualizes or finds value in thinking of things as journeys or trips, how can you navigate and have a good journey without a destination, right?
I think there needs to be a journey. Sorry, there needs to be a destination and to guide your journey. And when you have
Yeah.
the island in your mind, can you see the island in your mind as the navigator Papa Mau,
Is that part
Mo
of
Pielu? Yeah,
the
he was like he
right?
was the person who brought back celestial navigation for
Wow.
the Polynesian, and he just had this corridor passed down over generations to him. Had never left the island, but they said,
Yeah.
yeah, can you sail here and here? And he was like, yeah, yeah. And then he said, like, the first thing you have to do is, can you see the island? Can you see it in your mind? But yeah, and then that's kind of like half the journey. Because you'll be encountering storms and waves and uncertainty. But if you can see the journey, if you can see the destination
Yeah.
in your mind, then you know that you're going to be getting through it. And if we can put a destination of what and what that looks like, if it's a 3-day work week as the step one, and then they're going all the way to this solar punk animist full game B future. I think one of the famous examples was they asked him, "Can you sail to this place?" And then they jumped on a ship, and then he started navigating, and they pulled out the compass, like they pulled out some
Yeah.
navigation technology, and he jumped off and he swam back to shore because he was like, man, if you don't trust me, if you don't back my
True.
corridor, and what's the point? So
Yeah.
and like, yeah, and that's why we have all this the schools of knowledge around celestial
Yeah.
navigation, of
Yeah.
collective coming back to our whanake, like back to the ground, back to operations. Um, just like mid journey, about like, and we've seen that
Yeah.
text to image, text to video coming out now. It's pretty much text to storytelling,
Yeah.
text to aspiration.
Idea to
Yeah,
storytelling.
yeah, idea to storytelling, and then
Yeah.
from storytelling to shared aspiration as a society. Like those are the stepping stones.
We have Dune in the movies, and in their sci-fi, they had a massive war with AI.
Yeah,
Again, this is very poignant to where we are in this history. And so there's no computers, so humans do everything, and they have to navigate this complexity of jumping um, through hyperspace or whatever between 2 points, and they don't have computers to do the calculations. So people take a sacred psychedelic and then navigate it. And it's, I don't know, it was just making me think around,
That's
is that a non-computer alternative to space navigation that's based on that tradition of celestial navigation, in Polynesia?
that's wicked, bro. That's so cool. Um, I think that indigenous knowledge is linked to place, and so an indigenous knowledge of an ecosystem will develop with the connection as the connection to that
Mm,
place develops. And then when an indigenous people migrates, they'll take the principles of living with the environment and all those things and then apply it to the new environment. There'll be a transitionary period where the the knowledge from the previous space doesn't apply to the new place, but they'll start to develop and emerge places like knowledge. And so, kind of, we're on our planet right now, and the celestial navigation is tied to, I think, will be tied to our planet potentially. And as
mm,
we travel to a new planet or interplanetary travel, your the principles of navigation would probably be similar, but you would develop and develop this new knowledge based on your wherever you go as you go, and then as you've fleshed out some part of the galaxy, then you will have this huge body of knowledge that some people would potentially hold,
mm.
and that's would require heaps of computational power. So that example you used of like the what are they called? Are they the Bene Gesserit? Do they do that or nah?
No, it's
They're
the guild navigators.
the Guild
The
Navigators. Yeah,
navigators, yeah.
they would have to process all of that, but that is like the same at the same scale of these indigenous human computers holding all this
Yeah,
knowledge without the relying
exactly.
on
External
external
technology. Yeah.
technology. Like they are the technology.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things. One that made me think of when we talked about these cycles of destruction on Earth and the collapse of biology and the reemergence. We talked about in any that the oral transmission of knowledge is actually probably the most survivable through an apocalypse,
Mm,
which is fascinating. Like it's a technology that's actually perfectly adapted on Earth if you have periodic catastrophes, right? And that maybe like complex external technology is way more prone to being completely lost.
mm,
Whereas if any of the humans that had this knowledge, you don't need a sophisticated production network to make the new iPhone and server rack to continue this on to transmit it, right?
mm,
And of course, we've had to challenge ourselves if we're really being animistic about how we view things. These divisions of technology being alien to humans is probably not appropriate. It's more words like external and internal, biological or silicone, metal or carbon, right?
mm,
Rather than sort of the Judeo-Christian division of like humans are wholly separate and distinctive from the rest of the world. And it also made me think, bro, that I remember reading early descriptions of Western explorers encountering indigenous people in Australia and I think maybe in like the Gobi Desert. And they would always describe from their view, oh, it's a wasteland. It's a desolate wasteland where they live. There's nothing there. And when you're talking about that, this indigenous knowledge is relational to the land and place. I was thinking maybe we'll look back one day in space. We say it's a void. There's nothing there. But that's what those Western explorers were saying about the places that some
mm,
indigenous people live. Oh, the oceans are a desert. There's nothing there. And if you had no skill, okay, you die in 20 seconds in space or 5 seconds. But there's some places on Earth where indigenous people thrive, where if you just wandered in, if I just wandered in there, I could be dead in an hour,
yeah.
from heat stroke or whatever. So it's like, I do wonder if maybe these places which we in a Western view just looks to them as dead and lifeless, that maybe there might be some in the predigenous
Yeah.
approach might say maybe they're not as completely dead and lifeless
Mm.
as we think they are. I'm not saying like we'll be swimming outside in space with no spacesuit. I'm just saying it seems like there would be some hubris to say we can be certain of how lifeless they are. You know, maybe in the vast future there will be an indigenous people between planets. You know, the space between these bodies. Anyways, I
Mm,
just this got me thinking that it's easy to judge things as being devoid of resources or potential to be a place to thrive until you know them. And we don't have a deep
yeah,
history of people living out there yet. Right? So how can we judge that?
because that's the Fermi. Is it the Fermi paradox? Say like where they're looking for the likelihood of societies or civilizations in the galaxy, and I suppose that is based on a society that is exactly the same as us, but just like how those Western explorers were looking, if they saw another type of Western society, they'd be like, "Damn, we found one," but there were none on our planet. There was no one like them, but there were advanced
Mm,
civilizations in a different way that wasn't seen and understood and captured in their knowledge systems. They were their whole worldview. So maybe the likelihood of chancing upon or encountering advanced civilizations go up if we broaden our understanding of what we understand as an advanced civilization.
mm,
And then that might be what we have to do when we think about futures. Like, what do we think about as the future state of civilization? Because we probably have it in our mind. Oh, it needs to look like this, but that's because that's only what we know. When actually, there might be the Aboriginal outback desert
yeah,
civilization where we have no understanding of, but it's rich with life and understanding and connection to that place for millennia.
yeah.
How do we summarize this? What did we talk about in our like?
ChatGPT 4 can figure
Yeah,
that out.
ChatGPT 4. Hey, figure out what we went on about.
Find something useful from this.
Yeah, I think it all comes back to that relational worldview and that relational stack. Like AI decisions would be based on that. Your the way in which you develop out civilization across the cosmos to other planets will be based on a relational. You're not going to set up a monoculture and
Mm-hmm.
replicate yourself here. You'd have to
Yeah,
acknowledge that where you don't see something that's similar to yourself, there still may be beauty. We're going to have like completely different ways of living, but all equally valid, all equally relational with the ecosystems they come from. And yeah, just coming back for us, it's like, yeah, what does the future look like, and how do we not fall into that trap of it has to look like when the Western travelers went somewhere they wanted to see
mm,
something specifically
yeah,
and they didn't, and they thought, oh, that's not it. How do we on the journey to a destination let the destination guide us, but not let that blind us from what other potentials could
yeah.
be.
It makes me think of like SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This
Mm,
outfit, they get criticized constantly because they're mainly looking for radio transmissions, and people are like, "There's that. Surely that's a terrible way to transmit information intergalactically. So why are we looking for signs of advanced civilization via this thing, which isn't good to do that?" And they're sort of like, "Well, we only have radio telescopes," but it just made me think of what you were saying,
mm.
Drake, the Fermi paradox.
The
No, the
Drake
Drake
equation, I
equation.
think,
Yeah.
thinking about what's the state of advanced civilization going to look like? How do we make sure we don't get fixed on one thing and expect that to be what it is? Because like mid journey and these kind of generated images are planting in what it should look like. So how do
Mm,
we use it to guide us, but also not let it um, fix our idea,
restrict.
restrict our
Yeah.
idea of what it needs to be? Because we might get to something else, or we might not potentially explore what other things would be. That will be completely different. Like I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
the British Imperial Centre versus the red center of the outback. When they got there, they've been like, man, this is a bloody this is just a desert where there's no life. How
Yeah,
could you survive here? But man, life has been happening there for tens of thousands of years.
yeah.
My daughter's back.
That's a good cue, huh?
Yeah.
Sweet, bro. I'll let you go, brother. We just
You wrap us up, bro.
sounds good. Episode 8 done.